In a previous episode, what I did was to take a drum loop for a backing track and look at all of the ways in which it's possible to detect the tempo of that drum loop. Let's suppose it's a drum loop that hasn't come from the Apple Loops library, or maybe it's a loop that you've sampled off a record and you want to make part of your track and you don't know its original tempo, how to bring that into Logic, how to detect its tempo, and then how to get the rest of your backing track to play back at the tempo of that loop. So if you haven't watched that episode, I strongly recommend you go and do that, exactly that, because I think it's quite a goodie. I do. But I did mention that the kind of kickoff point at the start of that video was all about the idea that back in the day, sample CDs and places where we might get loops were really sampler fodder rather than workstation fodder. And what I mean by that is that there was a time, hold your breath, this is going to come as a surprise, that there was no audio capability within the recording software that we were using. In fact, once upon a time, there wasn't even always software. The first sequences were obviously designed entirely for MIDI, and they didn't have lovely graphical user interfaces, and they couldn't do audio and software instruments side by side. Some of them, for instance, were like my first sequencer, the Roland MC50. I couldn't afford the 500, which was the one that was on top of the pops. There you go. You can't have everything. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to take a kind of sampler approach to how do we get a drum loop to sit inside in time with the rest of our track. In other words, we're not going to require sort of an audio track and audio processing capability to do that detection. We're going to go old school and we're going to tune this drum loop until it's in time with our track, whether it likes it or not. Let's see the predicament that I've created for us. At the start of the previous video, the one that I'm suggesting you go and watch first, I've got a backing track at 112 beats per minute, and I've dragged in a drum loop. I've lined up the start point for it, but it's not playing back at 112 BPM. And it stops early. Basically, it's a disaster, but one that I think we can fix. So how do we go about the process of creating a sampler instrument which could potentially play this drum loop back in time? Well, firstly, we need a sampler instrument. So what I'm going to do is to take this drum loop and I'm going to take it down here into Logic's original sampler. And in here, in full old school mode, again, none of those original samplers would have chopped things up into slices for us. No, they would have relied on what we refer to as classic mode, whereby I hold down a key. Still good after all these years, and it plays back on whatever key that I play it on. Just wonder how like drum and bass and jungle became a thing. No idea. Okay, so what we've got here is the loop, which is playing back on C3, and eventually I'll get to C3. I think it's here now. So there's the whole of my loop. So what I'm going to do first of all is I'm going to make sure that what we're trying to do is to cut in right on that section, which is not going to be so easy with this resolution. Now, to make life easy for myself, what I'm actually going to do is to make sure that I'm only looking at a tiny little bit of this waveform display. And what I'm then going to do is to zoom in so that the only bit that we can see includes a much more detailed version of where the start sample moment point is. The sample start point moment, I've just said. Thank you for watching. Okay, so what we've now got is a start point, which feels pretty good. So I haven't cut off the front of that note, but of course now we're only hearing the little bit that I've selected so far. We come out of zoom mode, and what I'm actually looking for here is, I think, the beginning of bar 3 of this loop. What do I mean by that? Okay, so I think I'm right in saying that there isn't a downbeat at the beginning of bar 2. This is quite a funky groove, and I think that at the beginning of bar 2 there is a kind of silence, and that's going to make it really hard for me to find a loop point. Similarly, right at the end there's a little tom fill which doesn't provide a downbeat at the beginning of what would be bar 5. That's also going to make for quite a difficult loop point, but I think if we can find the beginning of bar 3 where there is a kick drum, we can set a loop, and then if we need to, we can double its length. I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to click along in time, and we're, I think, going to discover that the beginning of bar 2 doesn't exist. So I'm going to play that again, and I'm looking for the beginning of bar 3. Which I think is there. Again, what I'm going to do is to sort of zoom in, and we'll see where we are. Okay. Okay, actually we might need that hit. Anyway, we're about to find out. Maybe I've put that in the wrong place. The great thing about looping is we're about to discover. So what I'm actually going to do is to make sure that firstly, we're now in loop mode, and I'm going to select forwards for this. And what I then need to do is to ignore the loop points as they're currently set up, because of course I want to loop across the entire duration of the section that I have just cut out. So I'm going to move this second loop point all the way back to here, where it will sort of cozy up against that kind of edit point where I've created the end of my loop. Now then, which of those two hits is the downbeat? Okay, well, it's not that one, is it? Let's see if it's this one instead. So let's create a loop here instead. And it's not that one either. So it actually turns out that we do need that. That is effectively the last 16th, I think, of our beat loop. And that feels about right to me, more or less. Again, no precise science here. It's fun, isn't it? Okay, so we've now got a loop. Now, we know that this is out of time with the original track because I haven't done anything to change its playback speed yet. What I'm going to do is to mute the original, and I'm going to just play the very beginning of this loop. I only need the beginning of it because, of course, I can just extend its length after I've played it in, and we know it's out of time. Sure enough, it's still out of time. So what I'm going to do is to quantize that so that I know that note starts on the downbeat. And what I'm also going to do is to chop it at the end of bar 2, because I know that my loop only needs to be that long. I'm going to shorten the note that I've played, which currently lasts longer than that, so that I've got a nice, exactly 2 bar long loop that's happening there. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to copy that region so it happens 4 times. So in theory, if this loop were in time, we would be in really good shape now because it would just be playing at that at the right speed. But we know that it's not. And the only way in old school samplers that I had an opportunity to put a sample like this in time was to use my ear and to tune it so that as its pitch and time relationship are locked, as I tune it, it gets faster or slower. I'll show you what I mean. We're going to just solo this so we're hearing it by itself. And what I've got here are pitch controls, both in terms of fine tuning, which I think we're definitely going to need, and in terms of coarse tuning. And in terms of listening back, I'm going to run this with the metronome because the metronome is going to help us detect whether we're getting closer to these individual bits of this loop playing back in time. But of course, if I start changing timings on playback, that's not going to help me with the beginning of each new section, because of course it's slowing down halfway through the loop. Each time I've got to go back to the start. So now it's too slow, so I'm going to speed it up. It's still too slow. I'm going to take it back up here. I'm going to pitch it down this way. In fact, we're going the wrong way, aren't we? Okay, we're getting somewhere. Now, if it turns out, of course, and this is where pitch gets really confusing, if it turns out that actually I need it to go even further in that direction, what I actually need to do is to take the whole coarse tuning up one semitone, at which point we start again all the way over here by bringing it down half a semitone. So that is exactly the same as the coarse tuning being at 0, but the fine tuning being up 50 cents. Okay, so in other words, it's now up half a tone, which means if I take it up a whole tone and turn it down, I'm now up half a tone. Yes? Yes. That feels pretty good. Let's try it in the whole track. Let's turn the metronome off too. And there it is. So that's working quite nicely. Now I've deliberately selected only 2 bars of this drum loop, which means that we've lost the kind of tom fill on the end because I didn't include it in the bit of the loop that I chose to sample. Similarly, I might have only selected just the first bar if I really did want that kind of really old school super sampled feel. So obviously the first part you're doing is to select the area of the sample that you want to work with. But once you've done that, if you're determined to be like we used to be once upon a time, where we were loading samples like this into Akai samplers rather than loading them into Logic Sampler with endless hard drive space, obviously a huge part of this was how much sample time did we have, and therefore how long could the loop be that we were trying to play back. They were crazy days, people. But if you're determined to kind of relive that moment, then yeah, come into classic sampler mode, set your loop up, get it looping so that it makes musical sense every time you audition it on the key. And then remember, you're going to have to then clock it to tempo using pitch and both coarse and fine tuning controls to really get things to be the speed that you'd like them to be. It's old school, but it's a lot of fun.